All right, I just want to do a quick little video of just some more factoring practice with quadratics. So we're just going to jump right into it. So let's go and start with number one here. Again, pause the video and try these out if you want, or just listen in, and then I'll have a few more for you to try on your own. So first one, so remember with quadratics, normally we have three terms. Like on number two, you can see there's three terms. In this one, remember how we set this up? We use the box. Remember the squared term appeared here, the constant appeared there, and then our goal, right? Remember when we're factoring, our goal is to figure out the outsides of the rectangle, right? So starting here, I know this has to be m and m, and then down here, right, negative 49, one option would be 49 and negative 1, but then you've got to remember that we have to check. We have to check this term, and this part right here is where that middle term comes in, and this has to add up to 0m in this case. So if I think through, if I use negative 1 and 49, that middle term is not going to add up to 0m. So it's not negative 1 and 49. This one, a lot of you probably would have told me pretty quick. It needs to be 7 and negative 7. So then if I have negative 7m here and 7m here, then that adds up to the 0m. So my answer is m minus 7 and m plus 7. So that is my goal. My final answer is writing that as the two factors, the two binomials, showing that they're being multiplied together, and then that's it. So number two, keeping in mind what our goal is. Remember, our goal is to come up with the two factors that create this expression here. So again, we can use the box, but if some of you are probably getting good enough that you don't really need to use the box setup at this point. So let's go ahead and try this kind of both ways yet. So for this one, we have 7n squared is that term. We would have the negative 15 here, and then it's that middle term, the 16n, that those two spots have to add up to. So just kind of thinking about where we can start. Again, we can start with the 7n squared. Really, there's only two things, right? 7n and 1n that multiply together to get 7n squared. So if I was just sticking with my parentheses down here, then I know right away this is 7n and this is n, because those two things multiply together get me that 7n squared. And then we can go and we can start working on the negative 15. So here's where making a list of things that multiply to 15, 1 and 15, 2, no, 3 and 5, and then that's it. So these are the things that multiply to 15, but one of those things is going to have to be negative in order for us to get a negative 15. So here's where, at the very least, we can just start guessing and checking here. So if I went ahead and put 15 and negative 1, I know that gets me negative 15. Down here, that would look like this if I put a 15 here and a negative 1 here. But then here's where we need to check that middle term, and that middle term needs to add up to 16n. And if I do this, I get negative 7n and 15n, and that does not add up to 16n. So I'm going to go backtrack a bit here. And at this point, I know it's not 15 and 1. I could have tried, I guess real quick, I could have tried negative 15 and positive 1. But that's not really going to get me 16n either. Now, the other thing that I do need to try is I do need to try thinking about what if I switched those places. So if I put the 15, so if I put the 15 up here and the 1 down here, that, again, I need to check this, so one of those has to be negative. But if I think through, this and this added together are not going to give me anywhere close to 16n. So 7 times 15, let's see, what is that, 95? 95 plus -1? No, it's not even close. If I flip those signs around, if I made this positive and this negative, that's not going to get me any close either. So I know it's not 1 in 15, basically, at this point. So again, this is where that guessing and checking really comes in. You've got to sometimes sit here and guess and check to keep trying. But at this point, I know it's not 1 in 15, so it must have to be the 3 and the 5 somehow. And that's where, again, we're starting to have to do some guessing and checking. I know, for example, let's say 3 here, 5 here. Start with that. I know one of them has to be negative, so then let's check it. So I get 35n and negative 3n. That does not come close to 16n. Again, if I just switch the sign, so this right now, it adds up to 32n. If I just switch the sign and made this positive and this negative, well, that's just going to make that outcome switch the sign. So that's now going to be negative 32n. So that doesn't work either way. But what I can also do in this case, what I have to try is actually switching the spot. So if I put 5 here and 3 here, I still have to work on the sign. And if I need the sign, I need to come out positive. So let's just try it. Put a negative here. That means, so again, kind of checking these boxes here, I would have negative 21n and 5n here. And if I combine those together, that would be negative 16n. So right there, I know the sign needs to be flipped. It needs to be negative 5 here and a positive 3 here, which is going to make those signs switch. And that's going to add up to that 16n. So remember, my final answer is the 2 parentheses. It's writing down the sides of those boxes. If you're just trying to do that without the box, again, what you're really needing to check is we knew the 7n in the end, but we have to really check this calculation here. So in the box, these two things multiplied together and combined is where we're checking that here. So again, the reason I like the box is it's a little bit more visual, helps some of you keep track, but otherwise, if you're just using the parentheses to guess and check, it's those two things that when you add these two things together, that has to equal the 16n in this case. So let's go ahead and check out a couple more here together, and then I'll have you try a couple. So number 3, let's try this one without the box. Let's just go ahead and do it with parentheses, for those that are annoyed with the box at this point. So remember, the first part, this first term comes from multiplying these two things together. So to get 2x squared, the only way to do that is to have a 2x and an x. The last term, so negative 12, comes from these two things, right? So whatever this is times this. So that has to multiply to negative 12. And so there's a couple of different options there. And then what we have to check is once we guess, we have to check that middle term, and that's the calculation where we have to check these two things multiplied together and then added, have to add up to 5x. Okay, so the 2x and the x are pretty much set. It's the negative 12 piece that I have to deal with here. So again, you can start with things that multiply to 12, right? So factors of 12 are 1 and 12, 2 and 6, 3 and 4. Well, here's what I know from experience. 1 and 12, that's going to get you some fairly large outcomes when you check that middle term. So I'm going to guess that it's not 1 and 12 for right now. And again, that's just from experience. I know it's probably not 1 and 12. 2 and 6, maybe. So let me start at 2 and 6. So again, this is where the checking comes in. If I place the 2 here and the 6 here, and then it has to be a negative, so let's just go ahead and guess. So let's check, does that add up to 5x, the purple lines, right? So negative 2x plus 12x, no, that's 10x. Again, if I switch that sign, if I made this positive and this one negative, all that does is switches the sign of that combined total. So now it's just negative 10, and that doesn't help either. Okay, so I know it's not that combination, but remember the order here, switching the places might also work. So again, if you're not sure where to start, just pick one positive, one negative. So I know that multiplies to negative 12, but it's the purple that I have to check. So I would have 2x times negative 2 is negative 4x. So negative 4x and then 6x from the purple lines, and that does not add up to 5x either. So again, if I just switch the signs, that would just add up to the opposite sign, but again, not 5x. So at this point, I've checked all possible combinations of 2 and 6. So it's not 2 and 6. So again, I'm going to jump to 3 and 4 and start checking, because again, I'm fairly certain it's not 1 and 12, just because that would give me larger numbers that I don't see as that middle term. So checking the 3 and 4, let's just throw down 3 and 4 and make 3 positive, 4 negative, and check it. So again, checking the purple lines, 2x times negative 4 is negative 8x plus 3x, and that adds up to negative 5x, but I need that to be positive. So right away, what that tells me is the sign needs to switch. So that means that needs to be negative 3 and positive 4. So now if I check this one last time, this should be my final answer. And I get, so negative 3x and an 8x, and that does add up to 5x. So final answer is 2x minus 3, x plus 4. All right, so number 4, last one here that we'll do together. This one is a little bit trickier because that first, so again, I'm just going to stick with the parentheses. So if I set up my parentheses, the main issue is what I noticed right away is that first term, there's multiple ways to get 4a squared. I could have 4 times 1, and I could also have 2 times 2. So this is where the checking is even more prevalent. There's a lot more to check potentially. And again, this is where the more you practice, the better feel you'll get for what you're doing. But let's just go ahead and start guessing. And again, it's the 2 first terms that get me the 4a squared. So I'm just going to go ahead and guess 4a and a. And again, it's the last term here that comes from these two things multiplied together. Remember, when we're factoring, it's just the opposite of distributing, right? So if we think about how we distribute and think about where those parts come from, that's how we're checking our work here. So those two things have to multiply to negative 6. So those would be things like 1 and 6, 2 and 3. Okay, so if I just want to start checking here, throw down a 1 and a 6, and the sign has to come out negative, so I need to make one of those negative, one positive. So now I need to check the middle term, okay? And that middle term has to add up to negative 23a. Okay, so if I check it, I end up with negative 24a and plus a. Ooh, equals negative 23a. Right there. That's it. That's quick. Sometimes we get lucky, or again, the more you do this, the more practice you get, the more better of a feel you get for this. If you had started with 2a and 2a, you might have gone through a little bit longer process of checking all of those. Whereas again, I just kind of guessed 4a and a, and then started with 1 and -6, and that was it. Again, that was just kind of a lucky guess because I was unintentionally trying to show a little bit longer process, but there we go. There's our final answer, right? So 4a plus 1 and a minus 6. So in the rest of this video, I will have a few more questions posted, and then you can pause the video, try them out, and then I'll have the answers there as well for you to see. Okay, those are the answers for the previous ones we just did. Here are the questions. You can pause the video at this point and try these out, and then you can check in with a little bit of an explanation here. Okay, so you can go ahead and move on. I did want to mention about number 3 there briefly. If you notice, it looks a little different than what we've seen previously, but the idea is still there, especially if we're, again, thinking about using the box here. In this case, there's only 2 terms, 3n squared, and then that -2, -2n, that's the middle term. So that's what those two things add up together to equal. And then there is no last term. So in this case, it's just plus 0. So really what we're looking at here is we're really only looking at something that is a monomial times a binomial. So if I start, really I need to start here and say, okay, well, so can I take what multiplies to 3n squared? Well, 3n and n. And then if really I'm just looking at checking this box, well, this has to be -2n, but there's nothing I can multiply 3n by to get -2n. So right now what I notice is I need to switch those two. And then think about what am I missing here? Well, it's -2. So really, number 3 wasn't a great one to give you guys. It really ended up just being a different, or greatest common factor of n. And then, so that would have been your final answer. So at this point, you can go ahead and check your answers on the next slides. There they are. And again, it just takes practice. Make sure you use your resources, even just Khan Academy or YouTubing, factoring quadratics, factoring trinomials. There's plenty of videos out there, plenty of practice. Go find some videos, some extra examples, and use those as you need them. Sometimes there are different ways that they explain it that might click. The other thing you might notice in the Canvas quiz, the second trinomials Canvas quiz, there are a couple of videos linked in it that give you alternative ways to do this. And for some of you, some of those might click a little bit easier. Okay, so good luck, do your best, and again, please reach out with questions that you have when you have them, and stay safe, stay healthy, have fun.